In the early days of Saul's reign, when the crown still held its shine, and the prophet Samuel still walked beside the king, a child was born. He was not the firstborn, not the warrior Jonathan, not the one praised in song. He was born quietly, without announcement, without prophecy. His name was Eshbal. At the time, Saul still stood tall in Israel, still anointed, still chosen, but the cracks had already begun to form. Pride whispered in the corners, fear crept into his prayers, and disobedience opened the door to something darker. Eshbal was raised not in chaos, but in its slow arrival. He grew up in golden halls haunted by silence. He studied scrolls beside courtyards where no laughter echoed. He heard his father's name shouted in battle and whispered in warning. He was not shaped by war. He was not called to lead. He was not taught to fight giants. He was a prince in waiting, but no one knew what he was waiting for. By the time the Spirit of God had left Saul, by the time the prophet had turned his back, Eshbal was no longer a boy. He was a man, but one no one trusted with a sword. This is the story of the prince left in the shadows, the king who wore a name heavier than a crown, the man who bowed to thunder and was broken by silence. This is the story of Eshbal. The hills of Gilboa were soaked in blood. Israel's last great war cry echoed and fell silent. And atop the ridge where the king once stood tall, the house of Saul crumbled into dust. Saul, the chosen king who had once stood head and shoulders above every man, now lay pierced by his own blade, his armor stripped, his crown gone, his legacy fading with the wind. Beside him lay his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, Malchishua. They died as warriors, but one son did not bleed that day. One son was not there. His name was Eshbal. Far across the Jordan, away from the battlefield, away from the roar, Eshbal sat in the quiet halls of Mahanaim, the forgotten prince, the quiet son, the shadow of a dying throne. The news reached him before the sun. Saul was dead, his brothers gone. The Philistines had crushed the northern hills, and David had been crowned in Hebron. Eshbal did not speak. He did not cry. He simply stared into the fire. He remembered his father's voice, not the rage, but the early days, when Saul still believed in God and in him. But those days were gone. Now only silence remained. And then came the man who never waited for silence. Abner, Saul's general, the sword behind the throne. He looked at Eshbal not with respect, but with calculation. The blood of Saul runs in your veins. You are king now, whether you want to be or not. Eshbal looked up, hollow-eyed. But the people follow David. Abner's voice growled like a distant storm. Let them. I'll gather the rest. You wear the crown, and I'll put it on your head. And so the line was drawn, not between kingdoms, but within a nation, not over land, but over legacy. In the shadows of Gilboa's blood, a reluctant king rose, but some men are not forged by fire. Some are melted by it. The crown was not gold. It was not polished nor adorned with jewels. It was a weight, a curse, disguised as a gift. Eshbal wore it now, but his hands, they trembled. His voice faltered. Because though he sat on the throne, he was not the one they feared. Abner was. Across the lands of Gilead, Jezreel, Ephraim, Abner moved like a storm. He gathered warriors, stirred old loyalties, ignited fading hopes. To the people he preached, The son of Saul still lives. The kingdom endures. But behind his speeches was strategy. Behind his loyalty was leverage. Because Abner didn't need a king. He needed a figurehead. In Mahanaim, Eshbal began to notice. Reports didn't come to him. They came to Abner. Commands weren't followed until Abner nodded. Guards looked to the general first, then to their king. He was king in name, but the kingdom belonged to another. Still, he said nothing. Because fear wears many faces, and Abner's shadow was long. Until one evening, Abner stood before the king, bold, confident. Eshbal, his voice quiet but firmer than before, spoke. "You act as though this is your kingdom, not mine." Abner didn't flinch. He stepped forward, eyes like steel. "It is mine. You wear the crown because I let you. I saved the house of Saul, not you. You are not a king, Eshbal. You are a placeholder." That night, Eshbal sat alone in his chamber. He lit no incense. He spoke no prayers. He simply stared at the crown on the table and wondered, was he ever meant to wear it? Or was he just a name, a shadow in another man's game? The nights in Mahanaim had grown colder, not from weather, but from something unseen, something watching. Eshbal no longer slept in peace, and when he did, he wished he hadn't. The dreams began like a whisper, shadows crawling along the corners of his mind. The face of his father, flickering in the flames. Saul, eyes wide, crown shattered. Words backwards, jumbled, cursed, like prophecy twisted by madness. And then, screams, not of war, but of judgment. He would wake gasping, clutching his throat, sweat pouring, fingers shaking. He told no one, because kings don't dream of ghosts, unless they become them. But one night it changed. He was no longer in the palace. He stood in the fields of Gilboa, but they were not soaked in blood. They were graves. Spears rose like gravestones. The wind carried names, and there, beneath the dim sky, stood a figure. Jonathan, alive, whole, stern. Jonathan, you were not meant to rule. Eshbal, then why did I survive? Jonathan, because Abner needed someone to wear Saul's name. Saul, but not the king he remembered. This Saul was gaunt, wild-eyed, and covered in ash. Where is David? Eshbal. Father, I am your son. I am Eshbal. Saul, angrily. I had 4 sons. 3 died like kings. 1 hid. He woke, trembling. But not just from fear, from certainty. Something was calling him, or something was coming for him. That morning he did not go to the altar of Yahweh. He stayed in his chamber, ordered incense, opened old scrolls and new ones from Nama, because maybe Yahweh had forsaken him. Maybe the ghosts were right. Maybe power could be found elsewhere. And as the kingdom murmured, and the throne room echoed with empty counsel, Eshbal looked into the mirror and saw not a king, but a man haunted by the crown he wore. She arrived with no trumpet, no banner, no lineage, only mystery. Her name, Nama. They called her a queen, a widow, a priestess. No one knew for certain, only that the air shifted when she entered Mahanaim. Veiled in midnight cloth, eyes like polished onyx. She rode through the palace gates without permission, but no one stopped her. They didn't know why. Only that, they couldn't. She asked for an audience with the king. Eshbal said yes, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of loneliness, or perhaps because deep down he had already heard her voice in his dreams. She entered his chamber like mist. No bow, no fear, just presence. She circled him slowly, eyes fixed like a serpent sizing a crown. "You wear your father's face," she said, "but not his fire." Eshbal, uneasy. "You speak boldly to a king, Nama. Then rule like one, or remove the crown." She left that night without touching him, and yet he couldn't sleep. He saw her in the corners of his mind, in the mirrors, in the flame of every candle that flickered in his hall. And the next night, she returned. This time she came bearing gifts, scrolls, oils, symbols etched in gold, and a name whispered like a secret. Baal. "They fear the name," she said, "but power is not found in names. It is found in truth. And your name, Eshbal, it is no accident. It is prophecy." She spoke of kings who conquered with thunder, of altars that burned higher than Moses ever climbed, of gods not tied to law, but to force. Eshbal didn't believe her, at least not at first, but when she pressed a carved idol into his palm, a miniature bull, eyes like burning rubies, he didn't throw it away. He hid it, close to his chest. Rizpah saw the change. She warned him. Abner said nothing, but watched with growing rage. The servants whispered, and the priests grew silent. But Nama? She grew louder without ever raising her voice. Eshbal stopped seeking Yahweh. He no longer prayed in Hebrew. He burned incense at midnight. He read scrolls no Israelite had dared touch. And in his dreams, Saul no longer screamed. He laughed. The king was no longer afraid, but neither was he free. Because Nama had not entered Mahanaim to be seen, she came to awaken something, and Eshbal had already begun to answer. Mahanaim had changed, not with swords or fire, but with silence. The kind of silence that grows between men who no longer trust each other. The kind that clings to throne rooms like smoke. Eshbal sat taller now, spoke more like a king. But his words carried edge, not weight, and his throne rested on cracked stone. At his side, always, was Nama, watching, whispering. Then came the whisper that shattered everything. A rumor that Abner, his general, his maker, had taken Rizpah, Eshbal's mother, Saul's concubine, a woman of the royal house, and in the world of kings. To lay with a king's woman was to lay claim to his crown. Eshbal summoned Abner. No council, no guards, just two men, and a storm waiting to break. Eshbal, "I hear you've taken Rizpah." Abner, "She was a concubine, not a queen." Eshbal, "She was my father's, and you know what that means." Abner stepped forward, voice like iron. "You dare accuse me? I made you king. Without me, you're a name without a nation." Eshbal, "Then maybe I should learn to rule without you." Abner, "You are not a king. You are a gap between thrones. And when I leave, the kingdom will follow me." He turned, walked out. No bow, no blessing, just a door left open, and the kingdom left bleeding. That night, Eshbal didn't sleep. Nama stood beside him in the shadows. "The sword is gone. Now, build your kingdom with fire." But even as he nodded, he knew Abner's departure was not a victory. It was a wound, and it was deep. Because sometimes the worst betrayal is not the one that kills you, it's the one that leaves you standing long enough to watch everything fall. Mahanaim stood still, but the borders trembled. Abner was gone, and with him the last thread holding the kingdom together. Eshbal sat on the throne, but the room was colder now. Loyalty had thinned, whispers had grown teeth. In the north, captains questioned orders. In the west, elders wrote letters, not to Mahanaim, but to Hebron. Even among his own tribe, some began to say it aloud. Perhaps it is time to follow David. But pride is a cruel advisor, and war needs only a spark. That spark came in Gibeon, a well, a dispute, a single soldier slain, and then, like fire on dry grass, war ignited. Joab, David's general, marched in, iron-blooded, ruthless. He brought no treaty, only steel. 12 men from each side met in ritual combat. They struck. They fell. All 24 dead. Their bodies collapsed like broken statues. Honor was buried, and all that remained was blood. The field of Gibeon became a slaughterhouse. Israelite against Israelite. Brother against brother. David's house against Saul's shattered line. And leading the charge, Abner. Yes, he returned, but not to Eshbal. To battle, to pride, to reclaim his power through force, not faith. Back in Mahanaim, Eshbal watched from the walls. Caravans returned with wounded men, shattered weapons, and fewer banners. Nama whispered beside him, "Let the old order burn. From ash comes a new king." But Eshbal didn't reply, because he saw what she did not. David didn't need to fight. Not anymore. He only needed to wait. And then came the final blow. Abner made peace with David. He crossed the line, not as a warrior, not as a traitor, but as a man, surrendering the kingdom itself. Eshbal had lost the man who made him king. Now, he had lost the man who could have saved him. His throne still stood, but it shook with every heartbeat, because what once was loyalty was now a countdown. No victory songs, no war drums, only silence. And silence is dangerous. When it belongs to a king, the people no longer came for judgment. The elders no longer offered counsel. The priest lit no fires at Yahweh's altar. Even the birds had fled the palace eaves, because something unseen had entered the halls. Eshbal had stopped praying. He no longer looked to Hebron. He no longer feared Abner, because now he believed he had found a greater power. Beneath the palace, in chambers untouched by light, Nama drew circles in blood and ash. She whispered old names, names forgotten by prophets, feared by priests, and Eshbal listened. One night she brought him to the chamber. A black stone idol stood at the center. Small, heavy, horned, eyes of ruby that glowed without fire. Nama, not a god of laws, a god of storms, of conquest, of thrones. She knelt. She pressed his hand to the idol's cold face. Nama whispered, "Baal does not test you, he empowers you." And Eshbal bowed. The next day, a captain who questioned him fell ill, blood in his lungs, eyes rolled white. Another elder was found dead in his bed. No wounds, no struggle, just fear, frozen on his face. The servants no longer spoke his name. Only one dared confront him. Rizpah, his mother, once proud, now trembling. "What have you become?" Eshbal replied. "The king you feared I could never be." Outside, thunder cracked, though the skies were clear. Inside, the king walked with purpose. Incense replaced scripture. Scrolls of war replaced the words of Moses. He wore no crown of gold, but one of smoke and ash. And far away, in Hebron, David received a message. Abner was dead, slain in secret by Joab. David wept, but in Mahanaim, Eshbal smiled. He believed David was now tainted, that Yahweh had turned his face. He believed the throne was his again, but in truth, he had already traded it, not to David, not to Judah, but to something far darker, whose kingdom was rising, yea, beneath his feet. The kingdom was breathing, but only just. With Abner dead, Mahanaim fell into a strange stillness. Not peace, not mourning, just the sound of men waiting for something to fall. The tribes grew restless. Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun. They drifted. Some openly sent gifts to David. Others stopped answering the king's summons. And in Mahanaim, Eshbal watched it all and said nothing. He sat longer in the dark now, lit more incense, burned scrolls that bore Yahweh's name. His throne no longer echoed with judgment. His mouth no longer prayed with conviction. He had power, but no one left to obey it. And in that silence, two men rose, Baanah and Reshab, captains, trusted, brothers in arms, raised under Saul, sworn to Eshbal, and now watching him slip. They saw the smoke in the king's chambers. They saw the priests leave in silence. They heard the people call David's name with more confidence than their own king's. And they made a choice. Rechab. He's already dead. He just doesn't know it yet. Baanah. We end this now, not for hatred, for Israel. They sealed their pact, not with wine, but with steel, not in ceremony, but in silence, a covenant of betrayal in the name of peace. While Eshbal dreamed of thrones and bulls with burning eyes and gods whispering promises beneath the earth, his most trusted men sharpened their blades. He had feared David, he had cursed Abner, he had leaned on idols, but it would not be his enemies, nor the gods he served. It would be his own who would end him. Mahanaim slept. The palace breathed in the dark. Guards rotated. Torches flickered. All seemed calm. But beneath the calm was a conspiracy. Baanah and Rechab moved like brothers born for shadows. No armor, no trumpets, just a leather satchel and a blade hidden beneath their robes. They passed through the gates easily. No one questioned them. They were captains, trusted, familiar. They smiled, nodded, laughed, and no one saw the death behind their eyes. The guards had just changed shift. The halls were quiet. The king's door, half open. Inside, Eshbal slept, his robe draped, his crown on a table, and in his hand, the idol of Baal. He did not stir when the door creaked. He did not cry out when their shadows entered. He opened his eyes and saw them. For a moment, there was no fear, just confusion, recognition, and then the blade fell, not in the chest, not in the heart. They pierced his stomach. Slow, cruel. A wound meant to make him understand. He gasped, eyes wide, blood on his lips. And as he died, he didn't reach for the crown. He didn't cry for God. He clutched the idol. When they left, they carried only one thing. His head, wrapped in cloth, hidden in a satchel, dripping with the last breath of Saul's house. They did not flee. They rode north to Hebron, to David, confident, smiling, believing they had done a holy thing, believing they would be welcomed as heroes. They never looked back, and behind them, the throne of Saul was no more. The sun rose gently over Hebron. The hills breathed peace. The people stirred with hope. And then came the messengers. Baana and Rechab arrived at the city gates, blood still drying in the seams of their satchels, their faces proud, their backs straight. Inside their bag, the severed head of Eshbaal. They stood before the king, David, son of Jesse, the shepherd, the warrior, the man after God's own heart. They bowed low, laid their offering on the ground. Rechab said, "Your enemy is dead, my king. The house of Saul is broken. We bring you the head of Eshbaal, so that all Israel may be one." They smiled, certain of reward, certain of favor. They were wrong. He said nothing at first. He looked not at the men, but at the cloth, at what remained of the boy Saul had left behind. Then his voice broke the silence. "He was my brother." His words did not shake with triumph. They trembled with grief. He was the son of a king, a man broken by war, a soul torn by legacy, a prince who never asked for the throne and died with no one to mourn him. The captains blinked, confused. "Baana, we did this for you, David. You murdered a man while he slept, a man who trusted you, a man you served. Did you think I would bless this, that God builds his kingdom on betrayal?" He turned to his guards. "Strike them down and bury their blood away from the bones of Saul." Justice was swift and righteous. Later that day, David gave Eshbaal a burial, a proper one, with dignity. He sent no trumpet across the land, no boast, no laughter, only this, a nation, finally at rest. The house of Saul had ended, not in fire, not in thunder, but in silence. And David did not seize the throne. He waited until it was empty. And so the boy who was never meant to rule, who wore a name too heavy, who bowed to gods of shadow, was finally honored. In death, he received the peace he never found in life, and from his ashes, a kingdom of justice began. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos like this.